Thanks, Aileen. When you're history challenged like I am, it's very difficult in a day like this, so just abandon what we've got here. Next up today is a young man who is one of the finest fiddlers in Scotland. He has come to these occasions on many days in the past. He is a true Scottish nationalist, but he has one complaint for our Scottish Government, and he would ask our MSPs here today to think about this very carefully. Come the referendum in 2 years' time, he'd like to vote, but he will only be 15, so he wants votes for 15 years. Can we please put our hands together for Sean Allen and Tunes of Scotland? Very much, Sean. Excellent as ever. Next up is the Guardian's Address, this year to be given by Joan McAlpine. Joan was brought up and went to school in Inverclyde. She then went to Glasgow University, where I see that she shares at least half of her degree with me in economic history. Sadly, she was still at primary school when I got my degree. From university, she went on to a distinguished career in journalism and wrote for such foreign papers as the Sunday Times, the Herald and the Scotsman, as well as being a well-known broadcaster. In the last elections, she became elected as one of our representatives for the south of Scotland, and a very welcome representative indeed. She's had a very successful career in whatever she has turned her hand to, but what recommends her to me the most is she gets right up the nose of the establishment. So, for the Guardian's address this year, please put your hands together for Joan McAlpine.
Thanks very much, Ian. I also thank Sean for what was a really fantastic performance, and I think that was particularly appropriate following on from Aileen's recitation of the Proclaimers song, because there's a fantastic group that we're still playing, and that's the future of Scotland. And I don't know if we can guarantee votes at 15, but I think we can guarantee a future for our young people where Scotland is independent, and we can put all our resources into the future of our young. It's an enormous privilege to stand before you today and deliver the Guardian's address. In particular, it's a great pleasure to speak to you here in Lanark, where Wallace's uprising started. It ended, of course, years later, long after his death, when Bruce won that decisive victory at Lanark, whose 700th anniversary we'll celebrate in 2014, along with a few other things. We will celebrate and we will look to the future, but in doing so, we must never forget this man, without whom our country would be a mere shadow of itself today. In 1320, the Declaration of Arbroath said, "It's not for glory, nor riches, nor honour that we are fighting, but freedom alone." And although the Declaration was signed by eight earls and 31 barons, it could have been written for one man, Wallace, who gave his life for freedom alone, and not for rank or for wealth. Wallace's very existence, the way he fought with brigands in the forest, the popular support he gathered, demonstrates not just his personal qualities, but the strong sense of national identity at all levels of Scottish society in the 13th century, when national identity was not supposed to exist. This was about more than robber barons and feudal knights, so they did plague every land in the Middle Ages, and ours included. But Wallace and his fellow patriot Andrew Murray displayed in action what the Declaration stated in words years later. As Ian has already said, by keeping Wallace's flame burning bright, Scotland also burns bright. And that is why it's significant that not a single unionist MSP turned up this week for the official opening of an exhibition at the Scottish Parliament called Special Delivery, the Wallace Letters. It wasn't a political exhibition, it was organised by experts at the National Records of Scotland, and it's based around the only two known surviving items directly and personally related to Sir William Wallace. They are remarkable documents, and so rare and fragile they can only be displayed for short periods of time. And so I would urge everyone, if they can possibly, to go to the Parliament to see the exhibition. It's free. But they're also remarkable in their modernity. One was discovered in the Tower of London, and it's believed to have been found on Wallace when he was captured. It's a letter of safe passage given to him by the King of France, Philip IV, and it's believed that Wallace was on his way at one point to negotiate with the Pope and was in France. It was found along with a similar letter from the King of Norway. The letter shows that Wallace and Scotland were the centre of medieval diplomacy and politics. Scotland knew at the time that his cause was just, but it also knew the importance of securing influential allies in the world, the Rome, which was the centre of the universe at that time, and obviously the very powerful King of France. And it's so relevant today. It was basically what Scotland was seeking, was independence in Europe. It wanted to be an equal with the other powers of Europe, which is what we are arguing for today. The other letter was equally important. It's known as the Lubeck letter, and it was a letter from William Wallace and Andrew Murray. to the citizens and traders of Lubeck and Hamburg, telling them that the ports of Scotland were now open again for business after the Battle of Stirling Bridge. It was written before Murray died of his wounds that were sustained at that battle. It's significant because it shows that the struggle for independence more than 700 years ago was about making Scotland prosperous for its citizens. It wasn't just about honour and valour and the things that we're told that it was all about in the Middle Ages. It was about economics and access to markets. Just as Scotland's rulers in the early 1800s sold their sovereignty, in part because they were blocked from trading access to those vital markets by the British state. The issue of sovereignty itself today is a direct link to Wallace and the people who followed him. He was made Guardian of Scotland in the absence of the sovereign, in those days the anointed king. However, it has long been understood in Scotland that the monarch was to some extent contracted by the people. That is why Bruce was eventually king. He was a popular choice. In Scotland, the people are sovereign, but today they're unable to fully exercise that sovereignty. They will when they have full democratic control of their future, when they are independent. Until then, they do have a guardian. They have a modern guardian, the Parliament they elected last year in 2011. It was an election which electrified the world, just as Wallace's uprising caused excitement in Europe and travelled and caused the great consternation right across all the European kingdoms. When the Scottish National Party won an election last year, an overall majority that said it was not possible, the press of the world came to listen to the First Minister when he gave his address in London. They descended on the Scottish Parliament. That wouldn't have happened if we hadn't elected a party that was committed to taking the country forward and giving power to the people and establishing Scotland as the full nation that it should be. The national cause in 2011 advanced without so much as a paper cut. It was very different from Wallace's campaigns, and that's a good thing. The only injuries that would be sustained would be injuries from stuffing envelope, cramp perhaps. Scotland in 1296 found herself a guardian who would not just protect its people, but lead them. Scotland in 2012 had at last found a guardian to protect them not just from the worst excesses of Westminster austerity, its economic policies, but also a guardian to lead them to a better future. It's now up to every one of ourselves to ask ourselves what we can do to advance Scotland's cause at this pivotal moment in our history. A poll just last week in that foreign paper that I used to work for, the Sunday Times, which is not all bad, ran a poll last week that showed that the difference between the support for the Union and the support for the independence was very slender indeed. It's down to a swing of just 4.5%. We are very, very close to achieving what we have all wanted for a long time. The battles we must win now are not against the armies of another country. These people are now our friends. We need to win victory over fear, misinformation, timidity and torpor. We have 2 years, but think of how far we have come. We've come here today to remember William Wallace, whose sacrifice was so great, who prevented our nation being swallowed up. We salute him today, but the biggest tribute to his memory lies 2 years ahead, and that depends on the work that we all do over these next 2 years. Thank you very much.